Hey guys, welcome back to your channel. Eugene Cousins here. All right, so you've mastered your ground handling. You are efficient with your transitions in the reverse launch. You can do your forward launches. You got no more issues, and we get to the day that we are going to start doing our takeoffs and landings. That is today. There's a couple of points I just want to go over just to remind you of the right setup and being prepared, ready for that first takeoff. If you haven't watched the previous video, go over it. That's avoiding thrust in the wrong, initiating thrust in the wrong ways, getting into porpoise effect, the pitch, all that stuff. That is very important to get under your belt before you get into your first takeoff. Now, I'm going to stop the video with thrust control management. Basically, I'm going to illustrate that on the field. So I'm going to stop the video, showcase what I mean with thrust control. And just remember, the whole point of learning the power of the engine, the thrust of the engine, the effect it's going to have on you, and the lower pendulousness effect that was present in the previous video. To understand all that, go watch that video. It's very important. You need to have that mastered on the ground before your first takeoff.
Alright, so what we're going to do now is throttle management control training. You want to do this before your first flight because you want to learn the response time on your throttle, so you don't over thrust and then let go too quick of the thrust in that first flight and get into the porpoise effect that you'll see on one of my previous videos where I try to illustrate that. So leaning back and using the power of the engine to push me up a hill instead of leaning forward and walking up the hill. So that's how you learn that management of your throttle. I'm going to tilt this around. You can have a look at my field. It is at an incline, so you can see the effect. All right. So here we go. I start leaning back, using the thrust of the engine, push me up the hill.
Mastered throttle control, and you feel ready and your instructor feels ready for your first flight. Now it's about those key points that I wanted to highlight. First thing is, when you lay out your wing, make sure it's nice and crescent moon, it's not flat. Because if you do your forward pull up, or your not really so much your reverse launch, but your forward pull up, if there's not a lot of wind and you do that pull up and it's been laid out flat like you see some YouTubers do, then the wing tips will take time to inflate, and that is just you eating up space for whatever your takeoff run is going to be. So make sure it's nice and crescent moon, and do your final layout of the direction of your wing just before you're ready to take off, so that you could make sure about the wind direction. The time that you might take to lay out your wing, go put the mirror on your back and all of that, and talk to your instructor about that first flight, that might have been enough time for the wind direction to change. So be adaptable to that and just adjust that wing just before you hook in. All right, so that's the one thing. Selecting the right technique, very important. Make sure about the wind speed. That you do, when you're going to be doing the forward launch or the reverse launch. Going to go over those tips with you just one more time. If you are still struggling to determine the wind speed and what the right technique is. So forward launch for something less than 5 kilometers an hour, more experience, you could obviously go up to around 8 to 10 kilometers an hour with the forward launch, as long as it does not pull you backwards. So that's usually for a guy with a little bit more experience. A forward launch could work up to 8 to 10 kilometers an hour. So I would just right off the bat say, if you're going to do a forward launch, it needs to be in very low wind conditions where a reverse launch wouldn't work. So up to about 5 kilometers an hour would be good for a student for a forward launch. How to determine the speed of the wind. So if you're looking at the windsock, a quarter of the sock, break it up into, thirds. So 1/3 of the sock is inflated, it's about 5 kilometers an hour. 2/3 of the sock inflated is about 10 kilometers an hour. And the sock completely inflated and pushing is 15 plus. Now you don't want to go over 18 kilometers an hour for your takeoff. I don't think that would be solid advice for me to try and attempt doing reverse launches in 18 kilometers per hour plus on those first flights, simply because if something does go wrong, you can get dragged and you don't want to get into that. So try and be less than that. Experienced pilots can take off in more than 30 kilometers an hour. I've done that. It's not advisable. It's very rough. It's tough to accomplish. Okay. I'm not going to get into too deep into that. All right, so you've got your wind speed calculated, your technique is selected. The third point I want to highlight is to make a mental note on the horizon of what the wind direction is just before you do your takeoff run, because you're going to want to point your chest in that direction. Now, it can change in the pull-up where if the wind comes up and it wants to, it's flat above you in 12 o'clock position, but it's pointing in a different direction than what your mental note said. Or was initially, then it can be that was a mistake on your part in choosing the wind direction, or the conditions could have changed in that small amount of time. Basically, being able to point your direction into the wing, if the wing is stable above you, but it's turning a little bit in a different direction, then turn your chest towards that direction and get in underneath the wing. Now, I've already done forward launches and reverse launches. Go check out that video. I'm not going to go over it again. It's too much. The videos will just get too long. So I'm not going to go over all that theory. But basically, you just want to get in under the wing, and you want to get into run a direction and not crab. Now, what I call crabbing is, I mean that you've done all this training, all of this information is in your head, but you're now trying to get in under the wing, and you're moving sideways, and you are running like this because you're trying to get the wing stable and get into a direction. Crabbing is not going to solve it. Don't let the wing dominate you. You need to be able to dominate the wing. So moving forward, but keeping your chest facing the wind direction that you have an estimate for, or if it's changed slightly with a yaw, then you can change your chest towards that and then keep walking and make sure that it's nice and stable. You do not use the thrust of the engine until the wing is in the 12 o'clock position above your head, and you still got that forward momentum, and you can let the brakes up while easing onto the throttle and start using the push of the throttle. Your hands have got to be up. If you're still on the brakes and then start using the throttle, that is bad style, bad form, because eventually this is going to bite you with a stall. So you need to learn to run, let the hands up, let the wing fly in the 12 o'clock position, and when the point reaches where you can start feeling that lift, where you decide, or your instructor tells you it's now point for rotation, the point of rotation or point of lift, that's going to the 20%. Very importantly, you do not apply 20% brake until you're at full throttle, running at full throttle. Then you're going to go to 20%, and then you're just going to pop up into the air. So your instructor is supposed to help you coordinate these things. There is no simple way to try and explain this, 100% that you're going to listen to my video and be able to apply that. But getting those basics. Remember, you're not going to use the throttle until the wing is at 12 o'clock position. You're going to keep moving, keep running, and then only to start, when you start applying and you're at full throttle and you decide that you need to lift, or your instructor decides that you need to lift, then you're going to go to 20%. You're going to hold that 20% until you get to 50 meters. That's the next point I'm trying to highlight, is you do not get into your seat. Do not try to shuffle into your seat until you are nice and high. Altitude is your friend, just like speed. Speed is your friend as well. So getting to 50 meters above the ground, then only, if you pick up your legs, if you arch and you pick up your bum and your legs, then usually the seat will slide in under your bum, the seat board. If it does not, then it's not a problem. You're going to start easing off the throttle and maintaining altitude, and then you're going to take whatever the hand that is free, that's not holding the throttle, you're going to put that brake back on the magnet. Always when you release a brake, it needs to be on the magnet. So you put the brake away, you take that hand and you push down on the seat board behind your bum, and it flips in under your bum. It's the most common mistake, usually around 5 to 8 flights with a student, that they trying to get into the seat quicker. I have no idea why that is. It's the instructor's responsibility to talk to the student ahead of that takeoff and remind them of not getting into the seat too quick. All right, so try and learn that right off as a mental note in your motor skills. Do not that mental note that comes around. Do not try and get into the seat until you are 50 meters above the ground. Why is that so important? Guys that sit down in their seat too quick before you're actually lifting can have a bit of a sink, and that sink might be just enough for the prop to hit the ground and destroy the propeller. Secondly, you like 10 meters into the air, now you start shuffling around and you accidentally switch off the engine, and now with no thrust, because the engine's gone off, it could pitch forward and you're diving towards the ground, and basically you might not have the space to correct that. Hands up, if it pitches forward, you're going to hit the brakes, you're going to try and stop that from becoming too bad. The porpoise effect, go check out the previous video I wanted to show there. If you go off to the thrust, suddenly you're going to have that pitch effect. You've got to try and catch that with the brakes so it doesn't happen. It doesn't become too bad. None of that should happen if you just had a singular focus, meaning you went to 20% brake. Now the torque effect is floating you a little bit to the right, depending on what way the prop is spinning. But most engines, you'll have a right leaning moment, and the only focus you have is to fly straight, and that is to go a little bit on the left brake just to straighten out your direction, climb to 50 meters, slowly go off the throttle, push the seat board down, get into your seat, and then maintain that altitude and go into your circuit to go around and come in for your landing. Very important for an instructor to help you think through this, because it's a bombardment of your senses. The more open space you have, the better the training area, because if things go wrong, you can always just glide back to a landing. Make sure that you have your out landing spots picked before your first takeoff. If things go pear-shaped, that's like an automatic instinct. Where do I turn to? Which way do I go if things go wrong or the engine is off? Pick your direction for landing before you try and restart the engine or try to get it going again or something like that. It's important to know which way you're going before you try and go through your redundancies, the redundancy systems, and try your procedures, your restart procedures to try and get it back up and running. Okay, I'm not going to get too deep into that. Circuits. Circuit is a nice rectangle that you're trying to fly. Square or rectangle, whatever the field is like, how big the field is, it's most likely going to be a rectangle that you're flying, but you're doing 90-degree turns. So you're flying straight. Now I'm going to turn, so you go onto that brake until you've done a 90-degree turn, and you fly while looking back at your instructor and the field onto, even let's say back, but to the side. You'll see both of them. And then basically at some point your instructor is going to tell you to turn again. You make another 90-degree turn. That's your downwind direction. You're flying downwind from where you're going to be taking from your landing direction. And altitude stays your friend. Don't try and fly low. Altitude, if anything goes wrong, it's all about altitude. So I want to get into that last point, is when you've done your final turn. All of this is explained in the practical, in the videos that's coming up next. But when you're coming in, the switch off of the engine is around 20 to 30 meters above the ground. Now I still have my students switch off their engine because it's less distraction for them, and I'm reading their glide ratio. So there's good communication, and I'm telling them to switch off the engine so they can just focus on piloting the glider and their equipment down to the ground. Now, very importantly, a lot of pilots just freeze up, where they start turning in a direction once they go into the ground effect. We'll talk about ground effect in a second. But they're turning into a direction, or the wind's blowing them, and that last minute it's floating to one side. And so the pendulum effect is now you're pulling a little bit of G because you're turning in a direction. And usually what students do is they try and run it out in that direction. That's wrong. You're a pilot, you keep flying to the very end until you stop. So if you're floating to one side, you correct opposite and you turn back into the wind. And you try and fly to the very last moment that you put your feet down onto the ground, and then you're still going to break through. So I've met very few instructors that actually tell pilots what is the height that they start applying brake. It's important to mention this within the context of ground effect. So ground effect is when the glider, when you are approaching, you're at a much higher speed. Now the normal approach speed of a beginner wing like the Dudek Solo is around 18 to 19 knots. That's quite fast. It looks fast, and that's what stresses you out in your mind, is the fact that you're moving fast and now you're thinking to yourself, can I really run this fast when I'm going to land? That's not going to be the reality. Once the glider comes close to the ground, and that is usually around the pilot's height from the ground, is when you're going to start applying brake. It's the same time about that the glider will start entering the ground effect, and that is the air that gets compressed between the bottom surface of the wing and the ground surface. So you'll feel with the bigger gliders, if you're on the low end of the weight range, once it goes into ground effect, it'll level out and fly straight. That is just because it's compressing the air. Now you start applying brake for landing at your height from the ground. So if you're a short guy, it's later. If you're a tall guy, it's a little bit earlier. And basically, and this is very important, no jerking movements on the brakes. The reason why I say your height above the ground is because that's the slow process that you're going to start initiating that. And if you feel a positive, if you're going out of a glide ratio, a sink rate, and it becomes a positive going back up, then you freeze your hands until it starts going down again. All right, because if you let go of it to go back down to the ground, then you're going to pitch forward. And that's not what you want at all. So you've got to start applying the brake at your height from the ground, and you've got to keep braking through and until your feet gets about 20 to 30 centimeters above the ground. And then about you want to get around to want to go from a 50 to a 100% breakthrough. While you're walking, you are trying to brake all the way through to 100%. So when you're standing on the ground and it's stopped, there's nothing happening anymore and the wing's going to fall down. That's where your hand should be, is right here at the bottom. So know where your 20% brake is, know where your 70% brake is, know where the 100% brake is. I think I've covered enough on the theory side. We're already into 14 minutes in. I'm going to I'm going to pop up the practical session videos. And you got any questions, throw them in the comment section. And yeah, I'll keep on helping.
Okay, so what we're aiming for is to do a forward launch, and I'm going to close the trimmers all the way in, to at least where it says 0. You watch my previous videos where I explain the pre-flight checks. So checking your trims is the first step to making sure that everything's good. Obviously, just before takeoff. The other checks that you've done on the surface and the lines of the wing, that's all been completed. So go check that video out to see that. All right. Now remember, you're taking the toggles with your 2 index fingers, all right, and then you go between the risers and your legs, and you're grabbing that A riser between your leg and the risers, and you grab that A riser. You only grab the front one, you're not going to grab the A assist. Now you're walking forward, you're having a look if the lines are tight and if the A lines are clean, they're not entangled. You have a look at the wind direction. Always have a look at the wind direction just before takeoff to make sure that it's good to go in the position. So a couple of steps back, running into it. Oh, it comes up to the left, and all the risers, and go to 12 o'clock. And then you go. Yep. And looking forward. Oh, tension's up, and I bring it up, keep it forward. It's in 12 o'clock, start going to the throttle. Hands up, hands up, hands up. Go to 20%, take off. Woo! Perfect takeoff. Keep your legs up. Don't get into the seat, into the altitude. 50 meters above the ground. Now you take your right hand, put it up into your seat. That is if your seat doesn't want it to fly. That was a perfect takeoff. I don't want any more than that. Alright, now, squares. Turning 90 degrees, into the circuit. Flying 90 degrees. Make a nice square block around the circuit. So, I'm on glide ratio. Your instructor keeps you, just maintain power, get out of your seat, Now I know where I want to land, so I'm giving you a little bit on brakes, but I'm not on heavy brakes. Okay, and he's going to tell you to switch off, and basically you start landing. I just want to get out of the way of the truck. All the way through. So you start landing at the height of a person. Now what I want to do is I want to wrap the brake, so I'm going to take the brake a little bit higher. Nice and high. Get out of the seat, so I'm hanging, and I'm just gliding, going down to the ground. Your instructor will help you match that. I switch off the engine. Okay, it's nice and fast. And here we go. I'm going to land at a human's height above the ground. I start pulling the brakes. You see how soft that is? Let's meet your friend.